Hello everyone and welcome to today's event, Newcastle Connect UK. I hope you're all looking forward to today's event, and as you might be able to tell, I'm currently hosting this webinar from my home in County Durham. So let's all connect and say hello using the chat box below and let me know where you're joining us from today. So before I officially welcome our panel, I would like to share with you a few ways we're looking to make your experience today as enjoyable as possible. The event is being recorded and we'll be adding the option of closed captions when published on YouTube. We'll share this link with you, so if you miss anything, don't worry, you can catch up on demand and at your leisure. We are joined by 4 Newcastle University graduates who are currently based in the UK and are looking forward to sharing their experience and answering your questions. Jade, Jack, Shivangi and Dennis will be more than happy to answer those burning questions. So please do pop them in the Q&A box below, and any questions that we're unable to answer live, we'll endeavour to follow up post-event with you. So throughout the next 45 minutes to an hour long, I also want to discover a little bit more about you guys, our attendees. So keep an eye out for the polls and comments in the chat, and don't worry, we won't be interviewing you. Think more along the lines of, are you an early bird or a night owl? So I'll let you ponder on that, and without further ado, I will introduce our panel, starting with Jade. So hi Jade, I hope you're okay, and are you okay just to let our guests know a little bit more about you and what you studied at Newcastle and where you're currently based and working?
Hi everybody, I'm Jade. So I studied history at Newcastle and graduated in 2016, and I'm currently I'm currently living in London now and working completely remotely for a Yorkshire-based company, which is where I'm from originally. I'm working there as a marketing and communications officer, and I applied for and got the job during lockdown, which was crazy times. But yeah, when I was applying for the job, I actually told them that I was wanting to move to London, so I was lucky enough for them to say that's okay, we're happy for you to move and work completely remotely. So yeah, that's where I am now.
Wonderful, thank you Jade. And Jack, are you happy to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Absolutely, thanks Rebecca. Hi everyone, great to be here. My name's Jack. I studied ancient history and archaeology at Newcastle University, graduating in 2015. Since then, I've worked in investment and consultancy. For the last 3.5 years, I've been working with FDM, where I'm the principal consultant and SME within the risk regulation and compliance practice. Most recently, as part of that role, I spent 3 years working and living in Dublin, but most recently relocating back to London, where I'm now based.
Wonderful, thank you, Jack. And Dennis, are you okay to give a quick introduction to yourself?
Yes, sure. So I'm Dennis, and I studied cloud computing in from 2018 and graduated in 2019. And since then, I joined Red Hat as a software engineer, and I'm still working in Newcastle, and so I get more chance to get in touch with the university and also the fellow students.
Brilliant, thank you, Dennis. And you might notice that Dennis wasn't in our initial communications. We just want to say a big thank you to Dennis for joining us today and given his experience as an international graduate. So unfortunately, Amanda was unable to join us. But Dennis, I've been talking to today and has an extremely interesting journey and story. So I look forward to connecting you all about that in a little bit more detail in due course. And last but not least, Shivangi, are you okay to introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about you?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Shivangi. I did the BA Honours in Business Accounting and Finance, also called the Flying Start Programme, when I was an undergraduate in Newcastle. I graduated in 2015. Since then, I joined PwC and qualified as a chartered accountant, which is the partner of the Flying Start Programme. I then moved on to do energy corporate finance, and I've been currently working at Deloitte doing energy corporate finance and working on the net zero transition.
That sounds so interesting. I can't wait to delve into that a little bit more detail. So thank you all to our panelists for joining today. I just want to give a quick shout out to those that have mentioned and said hello in the chat box. So we've got Emily from currently in Newcastle, and Sarosh, who it looks like is or just graduated from International Financial Analysis in 2021, currently based in Newcastle. So thank you all for joining today, and thank you. I hope you're going to enjoy the next kind of 45 minutes. So if you remember a little bit earlier on, I asked you a question: are you an early bird or a night owl? So I think it's time for our first poll before we delve into some more conversations about what it's like finding those first jobs. So bear with me while I launch it. So my question to you all is: are you an early riser or a night owl? And if it's worked out well, it should be on your screen now. Oh, it's looking like a split decision here. I think mine's changed as I've got a little bit older. So I graduated in 2013. I'm going to stop it there for you all. Yeah, 60% say night owl and 40% say an early riser. And I wonder if that will ever affect kind of how you decide to work. If you decide if you've got flexi time to work a little bit earlier from 8 till 4, for example, like I tend to do, or do a 10 till 6 if you're based a little bit further afield. But that was just to break the ice a little bit. But like I said, if asked me that 5 years ago, I would have definitely said a night owl, but I'm usually tucked up in bed by 6 o'clock. So without further ado, let's get started and delve into some of the questions that were submitted in advance of this event today. And I want to quickly start with hints and tips for job hunting. So my first question for our panel is: do you have any go-to top tips for making a successful job application? I'm going to start with Jade, but I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it. And I just want to give a quick experience of my own for the people on the call today. And what I noticed when I was talking about myself in general across all walks of life is that I would use wording that was a little bit more negative or wasn't always selling myself as well. So I would say, I'm just good at, or I think I'm good at. And somebody in my team picked up on this, and now I use a lot more positive words when reflecting on myself, and that's what I would use in a job application. So instead of saying, I'm just good at, I think I'm good at, talking to individuals, I say, actually, no, I'm an experienced professional when talking to individuals. So that's my top tip. But Jade, am I okay to hand that over to you?
Yeah, of course. I like that tip. I notice myself doing it, so I need to be better at that too. So my top tip for a job application, I think would be honest about your experience. I think with every job description, there's always going to be a skill or a bit of criteria that you potentially don't have a ton of experience in. And that's okay as long as the majority of your skills match everything else in the job description. I think things can get problematic when you start the role. If you've said in the application that you've got a lot more experience in an area that you actually do. So my tip would be honest. I found that employers are really happy to get you the additional support or training that you need in a particular area if you need development. So yeah, I'd say be honest.
I think that's a great tip, Jade. Jack, am I okay to hand over to you next?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. And I completely agree with Jade in that respect. I think, employers understand your profile and where you're coming from. They're hiring a graduate who has gone through 3, 4, 5 years worth of university. They're not expecting somebody that's going to be well versed in, for example, FX trading. But having that honesty to say, look, I don't have the hands-on experience, but, researching the role and being able to have a conversation with the interviewer, I think is really important. So if it's somewhere you don't have particularly a lot of experience hands-on, you can go away and you can look at the main topic of the role or the main themes throughout that job description and be able to create almost conversational pieces that you can fit within the interview. So you may not be able to go into depth about it, but you can start that conversation. It shows that you've gone away, you've shown an interest in the topic, you've shown enthusiasm, and kind of, you know, you're a self-starter, that you've gone away and done that research. So I think that's very important. So honesty is always key. And just another tip as well, it's very easy when you're a graduate to essentially spam a very generic CV that you've worked on. It'll look fantastic, and you've spent a lot of time creating this CV, and you'll send it out to hundreds of people. You know, two things that I would say is, one, you know, try to tailor your CV to the role. So look at the job description. You know, what are the key things they're looking for? Somebody like Shivangi working at Deloitte will look for something completely different when hiring to Jade when she's working at Yorkshire Housing Society. So I think it's very, very important that you do tailor your CV, tailor your approach. So again, it's showing the hiring manager that you have thought about this. You're tailoring your experience to the job description. It makes it a lot easier to start those conversations, and you'll find you'll have a lot more success if you take that approach. It does take a little bit longer, of course, going through your CV and editing it. But I think that's very important, because the CV starts the conversation. So that's what starts the conversation. It's not the first interview. You don't get to the first interview unless your CV and your application is what is desired by the hiring manager. So a little bit longer than Jade there, but that would be my answer.
No, I think that was really great, Jack. Thank you. And it actually picks up part of the conversation that Dennis and I were having this morning. Dennis and I were talking about applications in our own career journeys. And Dennis noted about how, you know, kind of staggering those applications and making sure that you don't kind of also stress yourself out by submitting too many and then coming back and, you know, suddenly having a number of conversations that you're having to do and being stressed by that. So Dennis, I don't know if you want to touch on that at all, that point, and say if there's any kind of top tip within that you would like to give the audience.
Yeah, sure. So firstly, I really agree what Jack and Jade mentioned, that being honest is a very important point that may even impact everything. Because if cheating with your CV, that will be really a very terrible impact to your to the expression you pass to the interviewee. But another thing I want to mention that is more specific to international students, because personally I'm an international student, and back to the time when I got my job, I don't actually get the policy like PSW, so I don't actually have the like 2-year period or 3-year period to work in the UK without any visa. So actually I need to get a tier 2 visa to work in the UK. And the interesting thing that when I try to, I almost post like my CV, well-prepared CV to about 40 companies differently. And only half of them got a reply to me, and then among these 20 companies, and there were 10 companies actually rejected me just because they are not currently not able to provide the working visa. So that's the thing is, if you are an international student and you are going to want to stay in the UK for long-termly, so you need to find whether this company, they are eligible to provide the working visa to the candidate. You can actually find the information from online the Home Office. So I think I will share the link if it's possible afterward. And be sure that you check whether the company have or be eligible to provide you with the position. That would be really important. Even though you may say that within 2 years or 3 years of PSW period, that's going to be fine, but you will need to face with the situation that you need to get a visa. So that's the thing I may want to emphasize as an international student.
Brilliant, thank you, Dennis. Shivangi, I would like to just quickly move on and take a slightly different approach in the next stage of an application. And I know that interviews can often be quite nerve-wracking for everybody. It doesn't matter if you're a recent graduate or not. Is there any kind of coping techniques or certain ways that you present yourself within an interview that you would recommend doing, or that you've found have worked well for you at all?
It's a very timely question, because somebody else, and also another Flying Start graduate, reached out to me just this week to say, could I help her with their interview? And the advice I gave her was actually two things. One is quite often, especially if you have some experience, but even if you haven't, usually when they won't have an introductory question, the first question will be, walk me through your CV or tell me a little bit more about yourself. It's quite an open question. But I think this is the one that, even though it is quite open, can catch a lot of us because we don't know what we quite need to say. So I think the first step for that one is to always condense your answer to less than 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be like, I was born here, I moved here, your whole life story. It needs to be focused on your education, your qualifications. And if you do come from an international background, it's useful to mention that, but the focus should still be on the skill sets that you've learned and therefore what you're looking to do. And the second one, and I'm sure most of you again would have done this, is I would look at the job profile that I'm applying to, highlight key requisites and key skill sets, and then figure out a story. So like a star format. Excuse me, I just have a cough. Link that back to a story, and that's really helpful as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Oh, I know how it feels when you've got a little bit of a cough. I had a cold the other day, and so on all the Zoom calls I was in, I was having to have that glass of water in the odd little break, so don't worry about that. Does anybody else with our panel have any kind of hints and tips around that as well in terms of job interviews?
Yeah. So this is something that I prepare people for on almost a daily basis. Part of my role as principal consultant is helping our junior consultants secure projects with our clients on site. So one of the key things that we always talk about is kind of your body language and also your positive words. So, you know, if they're talking, it's not just okay, it's perfect, that sounds great. You know, be emotive to a certain degree when you're talking about it, because again, you know, it's that impression that you're interested and engaged and it's something that you're going to be wanting to do, compared to somebody that is almost sat there robotic trying to remember a pre-written script that they've gone through. You know, it's a conversation, it's two-way. So, you know, you don't have to keep all your questions to the end. You know, if you're having this conversation and you're discussing something, you know, you can ask those questions and you know, it becomes more of an organic process where you can, you know, you're having these discussions rather than what you may expect to be a stereotypical, they ask you questions, you give answers, then you ask questions at the end. You know, treat it as a conversation. So, you know, Shivangi's right, you know, that introduction to yourself is crucial. And I think you build on a strong introduction with that conversation that you're going to have. They will obviously lead that because that is the role. They need to get to the information that they want, but treat it as a conversation. You know, always come to it providing examples. You know, it may not be examples in the workplace, it may be examples from university. If you don't have an example, you know, you can also use hypotheticals, so you can walk them through your thought process. So I think that's always key, is, you know, come with those examples as well, but again, treat it as a conversation that you're engaged with and something that you'll enjoy.
Brilliant, thank you, Jack. And just for our guests who are attending tonight, remember that our chat box is open and that you're also able to submit questions live for our panelists, so you can do that just using the Q&A box. I think it's just to the left to the chat box, if it's like the same as it is on my screen, but you never know, technology and updates always change, so if you have any trouble finding it, just let us know by raising your hand. I want to move on and ask a slightly different question. It's quite a serious one, but I just want to preempt this by saying this is our own experiences So we're by no means experts on how to deal with this. It's kind of our lived in encounters. I just want to ask the panel, have you ever had any negative encounters during your early career? Have you faced racism, sexism, bullying at all? And if so, how have you overcome that? So that was one of the questions that we got submitted in advance. It's all very positive if you all had positive experiences, and I'm glad to hear that. Shivangi, I can see that you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I can take that. I can say that I probably experienced bullying. I think in a large organization, it's hard for management sometimes to have the full transparency of people's behaviors. You have lots of levels of hierarchy. So we had a manager that would had definitely had like favorites, and you know, if you weren't the favorite, you were working a lot harder and longer than maybe you needed to. And I was once at the other end of that. And I think if you hadn't experienced something like that before, and I don't think most of us hopefully would have, your immediate response is maybe I've done something wrong. And you might also want to, be, if you've been an accomplished person, you've been an ambitious person, you want to prove that you're properly. So if you've been criticized, you want to correct that. So that was my immediate response. But then I kind of realized that no matter what I was doing, the behavior didn't change. And then I realized it wasn't me, or it wasn't at least just me. And that point, when I realized that it was affecting my mental health, my physical health, I realized I should raise it. And then we have, I worked in quite a large organized environment. So we've all been allocated people leaders, but I think in most companies you'll have an engagement manager, or, your immediate lead. And so I reported it to them, and I basically said, what should I do? And I've got one really helpful piece of advice that I think applies to all situations. If you're having any difficult conversations with a potential boss, and it could be, all the way to the extent of bullying, the one way to maybe tackle that is, instead of going and confronting them and saying, this is what I think you're doing wrong, go to them and say, this is how I feel, because that's a fact and they can't dispute that. They might dispute what else is going on, but they can't dispute how you feel. And it also shows you open your vulnerability. It shows that you're being real with them. And then also say, like, how it's impacting you or the business, and then ask them for advice to say, how do you think that we or I can change this? And usually, if the person is doing something unknowingly, that will just make them realize that it's impacting you, or it's something that is negative, because sometimes they wouldn't have realized that. And if it still carries on, I think it's worthwhile is escalating it to the formal processes. In my case, my people leader effectively in the end was a mediator and helped resolve that situation. But I think it was useful for me to have raised that early, and for the people leader to have been in the complete transparency about the situation, because she knew that I was trying, and she had a full picture and could represent that back if it was needed. But that's only happened once, and I've worked for a very long time. So I think most experiences will be positive, but it definitely, I think experiences like this also will teach us a learning lesson on how we just manage difficult situations and conflicts.
Thank you for sharing. That's very kind of thoughtful advice, and I think it'll definitely be useful for individuals on the call if they ever experience that as something that they can use within their own personal and professional lives. We've had a question that's been submitted. We might not be able to answer fully the in-depth and intricacies of the question itself, but Jack, it might be a good one for you, because I know that your course that you studied then kind of was different to what you're currently doing. So any advice for somebody hoping to work in accounting tax from a non-business accounting degree background? So Jack, I wonder if it's just a little bit interesting for our attendees to find out how you went from your course to your industry that you're working in now, because the two might not always align. And then with the attendee, we can follow up post-event with some kind of further tips around that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, often people are surprised when I introduce myself that I studied ancient history and archaeology. I went from, spending time digging in holes around the country to then working in anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing. So yeah, essentially how that worked. And I think what's really key here is not to focus on the title of your degree, but to focus on what you've learned within it. So very much around your transferable skills. So for example, with archaeology, we were looking at interpretation of data. So automatically, when people think archaeology, like many of you may have done there, you thought of me digging in a hole. Or more generously, you may have thought of Indiana Jones. But, there's the data interpretation. There is, analyzing multiple different data sources, whether that's written records or, numerical data, and presenting that in a report in a format that is, legible for all to read. So, it's identifying key factors within your degree that are transferable into the business world. And I think that's something that's key for humanities, whether you studied archaeology, history, geography, is very much the skills that you learn and the skills that you hone doing those types of degrees are transferable. So specifically with my time spent at Deutsche Bank working within that financial crime space was very much collating multiple sources, written sources from many different areas, whether that's direct from the clients, whether it was from the business, whether it was from online independent reliable sources. It was going out, identifying the correct information, extracting that information, and then collating it into a report and adding my rationale, which is very similar to how I approached my dissertation. So I think what's really key is if you have a degree type that may not match, so if you didn't do an accountancy or you didn't do a business degree, identify the key aspects and highlight them. So, title of your degree and what you got, but then bullet point within, make it really easy for people to see what you've learned and what skills you have, because, if you've done an accounting degree, people are going to know what you've studied. You've studied accounting, and they will more likely have an understanding of what that breakdown would look like. Whereas if it is ancient history and archaeology, they're not going to understand what you've been doing there. So make it really easy for people to have an understanding of what you've learned, and show them the transferable skills that you've gained during your studies.
And that's great advice, Jack. Thank you so much. We do have another question in the Q&A, but before we go on to that, I just want to take a moment to launch another poll, which will offspring a question that I've got for Dennis and Jade. So this question is, how would you prefer to work? Is it office-based, remote working, or blended working? And I'm just going to launch this poll now, so hopefully it'll be on your screen, and so please feel free to choose which one you would prefer. I think this is coming up with quite an obvious steer towards blended working. Brilliant. I'm going to end it there. So definitely, so 77% of attendees prefer blended working, then office-based at 15% and remote working at 8%. So the reason I asked this is that Jade moved, as she said in her introduction, to London during the pandemic to work fully remotely. And Dennis is currently working remotely most of the time, even though his office is very close by. So Jade, can I just ask for you, what's your experience with remote working? Do you prefer it? Are there any kind of positives to it? Any negatives at all?
Yeah, so like a lot of people, until the pandemic, I'd never worked from home. So it's a different experience, but I'm sure everybody's nice and used to it now. But for me, remote working I've had a really positive experience. I find that it gives me a much better work-life balance. I'm able to, having moved to London, I don't have to worry about a commute time, which in London commutes can be upwards of like half an hour to an hour, which I don't have that time to be adding on to my day. A bit boring, but I can keep on top of housework and things much better than if I was having to add that extra hour or so onto commuting and things. And yeah, but there are, I would say a slight con would be, it is harder to kind of leave your work at the office because you don't have an office. But yeah, so if there's something playing on my mind that I know I need to do, my computer is right there next to me. So whereas if I was office based, the computer would be at work, wouldn't even have the option. But yeah, so I think, yeah, there are pros and cons. For me, the pros definitely outweigh the cons. But I think it's important to remember that there needs to be a split between work and life, and sometimes working from home, it is harder to kind of get that split. But a good way that I manage that is to really make sure that when I'm signing off at the right time. I'm not kind of tempted to stay online for longer than I should have. Get outside as well. I love a good lunchtime walk. That definitely breaks up my day because, of course, working from home, if you don't make yourself go outside, you don't have to go outside. But yeah, for me, the pros definitely outweigh the cons.
Thanks, Jade. I think I joined the majority of the UK nation who bought a dog during lockdown. And so I got a rescue dog called Martha. And so now I have to, when I'm working from home, spend that lunch break making sure that she gets a walk around the field. Otherwise, I'll get tears for the next half of my working day. And so I think that's one of the ways that I've managed to say, quite happy and quite productive in the workplace when I'm working from home. Dennis, you are working remotely from Newcastle. Just be interested to hear a little bit about your experience around it.
Yeah, actually, I'm still working from home even till now because our company actually announced that we cannot get back to the office until the end of this year, unless we raise some kind of application, and after the process, we can get to the office, and we are not allowed to like drink water publicly. I'm not sure, but at least as the regulation, there's a lot of restriction working at the office for now. But even though I think I will be a little bit different from what Jade think, because as an engineer, most of our work are actually done from online. I mean, as a software engineer, and even more differently, actually, we maintain an international group even before the pandemic, because we have an engineer from Czech Republic, from China, from Canada, and we all work together at the same time via the online communication tools, and also a lot of methodology for us to maintain this work. So it really makes no difference between working in office or at home. So that's the thing I would prefer, is to work at home, because most of the time I would prefer to work till late night, although that's not the standard working time, but I would prefer to like get up pretty late at probably 11, and then finish my breakfast and start to work until midnight. And this is the thing I found really. So I think this is related to the first question you've been asked, whether you have been to like a night hall or you would like to get up early. So for me personally, I would more prefer to work at home.
I was going to link it back to that first question, Dennis. You're definitely a night owl, and thank you for sharing. Shivangi and Jack, I know that Jack works blended, and I just would like to know if either of you would like to share your experience around that.
Yeah, happy for you to go first, Jack.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Yeah, so I started working from home in March 2020, like many others, when the pandemic first started, and it was fully remote working from home. It was the first time we'd ever done that. We were used to working with people online and across Skype that we used at Deutsche Bank, because I was working with the Middle East teams. But it was such a massive change for all of us. You know, we were working from home on laptops that, you know, we were given laptops. We'd never worked on laptops before. We were used to having 2 screens and a desktop. So that was very difficult. But we learned to adapt and succeed as we did that. But most recently, moving back to London, I have a blended role. So I spend 3 days commuting into London. Jade, I'd love to say it was half an hour to an hour, but for me, it's 2 hours. So yeah, a nice commute for me. But you know, I get an hour on the train where I can read a book and catch up with emails. And then I do two days from home. And I think what I've liked about that is I'm a very social person. My role encourages me to liaise with multiple people across completely different departments. And that's a lot easier now that we have the fixed working arrangement where we are minimum 3 days in the office, with core days for everyone being Monday and Wednesday. So you're guaranteed on a Monday and a Wednesday that everybody that works at the London office will be in. So you're able to go and have those face-to-face discussions. It definitely helps with kind of the reactive nature that we have sometimes in working in consultancy, where, you know, a delivery request comes in, then all of a sudden it's all hands on deck, and it's very much better to have people there and you can have those conversations. And if you've got roadblocks or issues, you're all sat in a room together. Now, unlike how Dennis said, we don't have restrictions. Very much, you know, government guidelines, you know, everything was lifted, so we lifted everything. So it's very much open office. We've got set seating plans, but there's no masks in the office or anything like that. So for me, it brought me back to reality, you know, commuting into London, seeing people on a daily basis, doing that commute, walking into the office, grabbing my coffee. I've normally had 2 coffees by the time I'm in the office. You know, all of that, it just brought me back to, yes, it's a working day. And then I enjoy my Thursday and Friday because it's kind of an extended weekend almost, because I get that lie in. So instead of waking up at 6 o'clock on a Thursday and Friday, I'm up at 8 o'clock, you know, which is much nicer. And I think it just helped with my productivity, being a social person who likes that back and forth with people. My productivity definitely increased being in the office for those 3 days.
Thank you for sharing, Jack. I'm conscious that we've got quite a couple of questions now in the question and answer. So I'm going to move on to David's question, and maybe Shivangi, you would be okay to answer this first. So David's asked, how many places did you apply for before getting your first jobs after university? I know that Dennis mentioned that he applied to over 40 in the first instance, and that it might be a pretty bad time to graduate from university, but there are increasing opportunities. So Shivangi, how many applications did you initially apply for?
So I think I'm in quite a unique position because I did the Flying Start program, where you effectively got a job offer from PwC as long as you passed all your AC exams with 2-1 and made sure you did well enough on the placements. So it's very much tied. So at the time of graduation, I was lucky enough that I didn't have to apply, but I did have to apply when I was applying to university. I also applied to like apprenticeships and professional programs. And then also, I guess, with some experience from my brother just applying over the last year or so, because he also graduated in 2020. I know he applied to quite a few. So maybe I can provide a bit more around just a tip around application in that space. So I think one thing that's helped me is definitely the fact that I did a placement. So I think I would definitely use, if you have the time, a summer internship, the time over the summer to do at least 1, if not 2 internships, especially if you're going to do something structured like consulting or investment banking. I think it's worth researching those structured programs because they're very, very centric on internship related recruitment. So that way, you don't have to do as many applications in your final year as well. You kind of shift the burden. And then you also have kind of like spread your risk a little bit in terms of getting the job that you want. The other tip probably is don't be afraid to apply for roles that maybe you think that you don't have the direct skill set. Just coming back to what Jack said, there's always going to be skills that you can leverage, and you are a graduate, so you're not going to be expected to have all the experience in the world. I know that my brother definitely discounted himself from certain roles, but unless you apply, you won't even know. So I would first look at what you really, really would like to do, and what your passion is. And if you don't know what your passion is, the easiest trick for me is maybe close your eyes and think about what you're thinking about when you're not thinking about anything in particular. So what are the thoughts that come to your mind when there's nothing in particular? For me, that was best out of waste. How can I remake something or redo something? And that idea of like recycling. And then I connected that idea of trying to make something new from something else to the broader concept of sustainability, and then look for jobs in sustainability. So if you can kind of think about even a theme that can be a passion, then you can find jobs to link to that. And ideally, you want your team to connect with your existing skill sets, and then you find a match. If there's gaps in the middle of like where you don't have quite the skills that you need, I would spend time researching or interning to get those skill sets, so then you have a complete match. So not completely quite the question you asked, but I think maybe it's relevant in terms of internships.
It is definitely. Thank you so much. And I think Dennis wanted to add on to your point. So Dennis, I shall let you go next.
Yeah, as they mentioned about my experience. So there's actually similarly, when I firstly graduated from my undergraduate school, university in China, I joined the PwC just like you, and that was with a placement project in my final year. So actually, when I first graduated from undergraduate, there's no such kind of 40 applications that would be so frightening. But I would want to mention that the reason why I get so many failure about my previous application in the UK is probably that may partially caused by without having the PSW policy. And as an international student, I might increase the difficulty of finding an ideal job, because the employer, they will need to provide you like a permanent job, and it's pretty hard to decide for them. And I think now it would be a little bit even easier for maybe for international students in the UK to get a job. So don't be afraid of making application, as long as you were prepared and you are sure that firstly the job is what you want, and secondly you do have, or you should be confident about you are qualified to this job, and then just do it. So it doesn't matter whether the result is a success or failure. What matters is you tried it, and you make sure that you get improved during all this process, and that's what I want to emphasize.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dennis. I think we'll move on to the next question in our Q&A, and maybe I'll go with Jade first. I've heard that the first thing HR managers do is Google the name of the job applicant, and I would like to ask the importance of social media presence for job seekers, in particular LinkedIn. So Jade, do you use LinkedIn at all? Do you use that for job hunting? Do you know of any of your kind of previous employees using that in terms of kind of vetting potential candidates at all?
Yes, I am active on LinkedIn. I probably could be a little more active, but yeah, I do try and keep everything updated on there, and engage with people on there, because I think networking is a massive thing when you're starting out. I'm not entirely sure if employers have been looking at my LinkedIn. It is quite interesting if you are applying for jobs and then you see somebody has viewed your profile. It's kind of like, I wonder if that's from the company. So yeah, I think be really mindful with what you're posting on social media. Yeah, because I do think it's growing. It's kind of like LinkedIn is like a digital CV. That's what I see it as at the moment. And I use LinkedIn to kind of inform where my career could go. So in the past, if I think of the dream job that I want to do, find somebody on LinkedIn who has that job and then look at their roles that have got them to that position and kind of think, right, okay, what could my next career move look like that could get me to that point? So yeah, slightly off topic with the question, but I hope that addition was useful.
No, I think it is, Jane. I think that's great advice. And it's actually reminded me, I was on, I think it was a conference or a webinar in a similar vein of this, and it was talking about using social media and your social networks, like you say, Jade, to kind of think about your career progression and to reach out to those individuals that you aspire to, or you think maybe kind of are the next 1 or 2 steps ahead of you in your career, and just ask them if they're happy to drop in and have that kind of 5-minute chat or call. I haven't personally done it myself, but from the call and the webinar that I was on, that seemed to be quite a successful technique. So again, maybe not answering the question 100% in terms of if employers are looking at profiles, but I think you can flip it on your head and use social media to your advantage, particularly LinkedIn, to help you kind of get ahead of the game a little bit. And also, top tip that you might find useful, if you're particularly wanting to look at working in a specific region or a specific company, find somebody on LinkedIn that's working there and just ask if they're happy to share their experience about what it's actually like to work there. And they'll probably give a candid review, and then that can help inform you if that's actually a right place for you to work. Because let's remember, interviews are a 2-way process, so it's also an opportunity for you to work out if the place that you're applying for is actually the right place for you. But that's just my little piece of advice. I don't know if anybody else wants to add on to the social media, social networking point at all.
Yeah, sorry.
I was going to add an additional point very quickly, just to kind of flip it the other way. I definitely think there's an expectation from employers that when you're going to a job interview, you have checked out their social media channels. I'd say it's a really good way to get like a full overview or quick insight into what they do as a whole and their company values and things. So yeah, I definitely think that that's something that you should be doing when you're going into interviews and things.
Yeah, and I just also wanted to add, I mean, I've recruited in my team and I've definitely looked at people's LinkedIn. So I know that from my experience and from those around me, yes, it's fundamental. I've also got the 2 other jobs that I moved on to after PwC were both through contacts from headhunters who'd both contacted me on LinkedIn. So I think it's also a really useful tool. I've definitely connected with people as well, as Jade has mentioned, the people you find interesting, whose jobs you find interesting. You look at their path, try to see if you can replicate it, what your path might be, have a coffee chat with them. And then I've noticed that other people also reached out to me, so passing that back on. And I think the useful part about LinkedIn as well is you now can get a channel to connect with people that are major influences in their space. So you can at least follow them if you're not connected to them. And eventually, maybe if you have a mutual connection or you have something pertinent that you can speak to them about, I would even I've gone as far as connecting with people I haven't met before and drop them a message saying, I'd really like to talk about this, or I find this really interesting and I would just like to follow your journey. And most of them are really responsive, or at least they'll be willing to accept the connection. And even if, say, you don't end up actually speaking on a regular basis, it's just useful to see what they're involved in. And my LinkedIn connections have been from being just my friends, family, colleagues to now being major policymakers in climate action. So it's given me a whole new network and a whole new awareness of the world stage. So I think you can actually make it quite a useful tool for your career. And for me, certainly, it's been one of the most useful.
Thank you so much. And I also just want to ask you all a bit of a different question. It's moving away from professional and career development, but hopefully we're joined by recent grads, current students, maybe even some prospective students on the call here today. As a recent graduate yourselves, as you've managed to find your first careers, budgeting, how do you manage this? Is it something that you do? Do you have any top tips for budgeting that can really help individuals in the first few years and to make sure that they're able to be happy and get that work-life balance?
If you don't mind, I'll jump on this one first, guys. So as somebody that graduated from university, and I've rented ever since. So whether that was in Newcastle, where I stayed for an extra couple of years, I rented in London, and then I went and rented for 3 years in Dublin. You really need to understand what your budget is. It's so easy, and it's so easy to budget, but it's so hard to stick to it. You can sit there and break down by the last penny what you can spend it on, but you finish work on a Friday and, your new friends at work say, should we go to the bar around the corner, or, we're going to go to watch a show or something along those lines. It's so easy to all of a sudden sit there on the Sunday and go, I've spent half my monthly budget. I've done that so many times, and you sit there and you just scrape and scrap and you get by. So don't think if all of a sudden you've got barely anything there that it's just you that's done that. But budgeting is key, and I think as long as you set yourself a buffer. So what I used to do was I used to set 2 budgets. So I set my Jack's a responsible adult budget, where everything was paid for, and then I had a nice buffer where I could enjoy myself, and then I had Jack's had a nice weekend out with friends, where it would then leave me with enough pocket money to afford my lunch and my bus fare. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that everybody's going to go through it. Because when you do start, and I know a lot of people will expect, you start as a graduate, your salary is going to be huge. For some people that may be right. If you get onto the right grad scheme, your remuneration is going to be a good package for somebody of your age and in your position. For others, I know myself, my first grad job, I was on 20 grand, which sounds like a lot of money initially when you're a graduate who's been working part-time and on minimum wage. But when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, it's not a huge amount of money. So I think, and I think finance does tend to impact mental health as well, because it puts a lot of stress and strain on your day-to-day life, because you start to think, oh, I can't do that. You start to compare yourself to other people, maybe people that are 2-3 years ahead of you that, have earned more money, and you start to think, oh, why can't I be like them? So I think it's absolutely massive. But I think you've got to stay realistic and just understand that, sometimes it's going to be really hard. But if you're aware of it from the start, and you don't start to, overspend and get yourself into mountains of debt, everybody's got, I think everybody I knew as a student had an overdraft. Everybody had a student overdraft. It was, this magic pot of money. But eventually that has to go back. So I know I've waffled on for quite a while there, but I think set your budget, understand a budget is needed. It sounds boring, but it's responsible and it needs to happen. But also understand that you're not alone. If it does start to get you down, starts to stress you out, there's plenty of places out there that can offer either free mental health advice to help you with stress and how to deal with that, but also there's places out there that give free financial advice to young people, so you're able to go out there, speak to people that can help you budget and maybe just help manage the stress of doing that by yourself.
Brilliant, thank you, Jack. I really like that idea of having the 2 budgets. I think that's a bit of a genius idea, and that's something that I think I'm going to maybe take away for my own personal life even now today. And what we'll do is post-event follow-up is that we'll link to some of the relevant resources, and also that Jack just talked about, and also link our attendees to the support from the career service, because you can actually keep on connecting with the career service at Newcastle University for 3 years upon graduation. So they're able to also help with answer some of the burning questions that we haven't been able to answer today, or maybe in the same theme as Jack around kind of budgeting and accessing mental health resources and the like. I'm conscious of time, and I know that you all probably want to go away and have your dinner or a cup of tea. So I'll let our panelists answer one more question, but in the chat box. It's just a little bit of a fun one. Where's your favourite place to hang out at the moment? Maybe grab a coffee or grab a bite to eat. I'll let you guys pop it in the chat box, and then if anybody's ever in the area, they can check it out. But without that said, I shall just wrap up the event and let you know about a little bit more about what's coming up at Newcastle University in the coming weeks. So if you've enjoyed this event today, you can find out more. So you can connect with us on LinkedIn, and we've got a LinkedIn group called the Alumni of Newcastle University. We'll pop the links in the chat box for you all, but if you've got that QR code scanner, as I'm sure we all do nowadays, because you have to use it whenever you want to order food in the UK at the moment, and you can scan that through now. Our Newcastle Connect events, they are a series, so we've kicked off with the UK today, but we've also got events that are focused on living and working in India, China and Southeast Asia. So you're able to find out more information by visiting our website. That's just www.ncl.ac.uk/alumni/events. Again, we'll pop these in the chat box for you, but we'll also put them in those post-event follow-up communications just so you don't miss out. That's just if you're ever thinking about living and working outside of the UK, keep your options open there. But I would just like to say a big thank you to our panelists for joining today. It's been amazing to connect with you all. Your advice has been amazing, and I look forward to hearing about your career journey as they progress in the future. And thank you to all our attendees for answering my poll questions. They might have been a bit odd if you're an early bird or a night owl, and also connecting with one another in the chat box. I just want to launch a poll that just asks how you found the event today, and then I'll let you all be. And that just helps us improve future events and also decide what kind of events we're going to run for you in the future. So my colleague Danica will just launch that for you all now, and then we'll let you carry on with your evening. So thank you and good night.